Welcome to the Nature of Teaching Professional Development webinar series. My name is Lauren Teamy, and I am the Ag and Natural Resources Educator for Purdue Extension, Delaware County. Today's webinar is entitled The Scientific Process of Conservation Biology, Analyze, Design, Debate. We will be covering background research, scientific research method, and management planning using the Eastern Hellbender as a model. Joining me today is Nick Bergmeyer, a research biologist and extension wildlife specialist in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources with Purdue University. Nick will be presenting on the scientific research method and showing a few videos of the individual activities as they pertain to this unit. I will then finish the webinar highlighting additional resources and the procedure to obtain your certification of completion for this webinar. And with that, Nick, I will turn things over to you.
Thanks, Lauren. So this lesson is focused on grades 11 through 12. It's broken down into 4 separate lessons. They're about 45 to 90 minutes each, really just depending on how much time you have to put into them and how much detail you want to go into. There are several objectives that we want students to get out of these lessons. So one is the ability to analyze, comprehend, and interpret scientific literature. This is a fundamental skill if you plan on going into a scientific field. We want them to be able to identify the careers involved in conservation biology. And most importantly, we want them to be able to develop a management plan and also be able to not only verbally defend their plan, but to constructively critique their peers' presentations, and also be able to implement the constructive criticism of their plans and be able to edit and revise based on that constructive criticism. So I'll just go through some of the background information, some of the knowledge that you'll need to present this stuff to your students. So conservation biology, this is basically just a branch of biology that focuses on protecting and preserving threatened and endangered species or species that are close to threatened. It frequently focuses on species that are at an immediate risk of extirpation or extinction. So popular species that you hear a lot about would be pandas, tigers, spotted owls, but it also focuses on things you don't hear as much about. So freshwater mussels or the Eastern Hellbender, which is what we'll use which is our model species for these lessons. So conservation biology, it is an interdisciplinary field. And so it is not just biologists out running around and trying to preserve species. It is a group of partners that are really from a wide range of fields. So you do have your wildlife biologists, but you also have zookeepers and geneticists and engineers and environmental educators. And all of these partners work together to devise these plans that really give you the best chance of success. Conservation biology also heavily involves stakeholders. And stakeholders are anyone that has an investment in the project or is affected by the project. So these could be granting agencies that are giving you money to actually conduct this work, or it could be landowners that are near the project or possibly even have the land that you want to work on. Stakeholders are incredibly important. If you don't have funds, you can't really do the work. And if the local stakeholders, the landowners don't believe in the project or they don't agree with the project, it makes it much more difficult to succeed. So it's really important that you have stakeholder buy-in. So with conservation biology, it usually involves management of the species, and all management is an attempt to balance the needs of the species and the needs of people to really ensure that you get as much out of the project and all species requirements are met. So this comes in 2 different forms. You have population management, which is the altering of the number of individuals in a population. So this would be like your species reintroductions or hunting programs that might help reduce threats to these species and increase their numbers. Or you have habitat management, which is work that will either improve the habitat that is already existing or restore habitat that is degraded in some way, or in some cases, create new habitat. Now, there's several different management strategies on the population side of things. And these include head starting, which is just raising animals in captivity until they are at a less vulnerable age. Typically, younger, smaller animals are more vulnerable to predation. And when you raise them to a certain age, when they're a little bit bigger, you tend to have more success. You lose fewer animals to predation. Captive rearing, which is just raising eggs and young animals in captivity until they're ready to be released. And then captive breeding, which is rearing or taking sexually mature animals and attempting to breed them. This last strategy, it's a little bit more difficult than the other two. Some species do not like to breed in captivity. The pandas don't like to breed in captivity. Hellbenders are difficult to breed in captivity. But when you can successfully breed them, it really adds to the number of animals that you can release into the wild. And when you're ready to release animals into the wild, this is called translocation. And all translocation is moving a species from one place to another. And there's different categories of translocations. There's augmentations, which is adding individuals to an already existing population. So usually to increase a number of animals if they just have a small population. There are reintroductions, which are adding individuals to unpopulated habitat that historically had them. So this would be if you have a forest that used to have a certain species of deer and they all died out, and you want to reintroduce the deer to that area. And then finally, you have introductions, which are adding individuals to unpopulated habitat where the species never existed. This final category it's a little less common, and it is a little more controversial because there are some issues with adding species in places where they've never been. But this is usually viewed as a last resort if all previous historic habitat has been destroyed for a species and you're still trying to save the species, and you can look at hopefully nearby habitat they just never made it to. With Hellbenders, we are actually doing those first two. We're doing augmentations and reintroductions. And the Hellbender is North America's largest salamander. It's a species of fully aquatic amphibian. They get up to 5 pounds, up to 29 inches, and they're very long-lived. They can live up to 30 years in the wild and even longer in captivity. But unfortunately, over the last several decades, sometime in the mid-20th century, they really started to decline. And they've disappeared from much of their entire range. And in Indiana, they are only found in one river in southern Indiana. They've been extirpated from their entire historic habitat in Indiana, other than that one river. About 10 years ago, we did a population viability analysis on this population, this remaining population. And what we found was that if we did no form of management, they would be extirpated within 25 years. So if we did nothing from about 2011 onwards, it would only be about 25 years until the species was entirely gone from Indiana. And that prompted the Indiana DNR and Purdue University to really start looking at ways to improve the population of hellbenders in Indiana. And that is the sort of motivation behind this group of lessons is we want to use the hellbender as a model for students to learn how to create management plans and themselves learn how to reintroduce a species. So we split this into 4 lessons, and I'll go through these first 2, which would be a slimy situation and a cause for concern. And these 2 lessons really focus on the data analysis and background research for how the important fundamental start for preparing to create a management plan and to conserve a species. So I'm going to show you a video for each of these lessons where we talk a little bit more detail about the lesson, and then we'll come back and cover lessons 3 and 4. So first, lesson 1.
Hi, I'm Nick Bergmeyer, Extension Wildlife Specialist with Purdue University. And today we're going to go over the first of a 4-part series of activities for the Nature of Teaching lesson plan, the scientific process of conservation biology. Now this lesson plan, or this activity, it really focuses on teaching students how to read a case study and then analyze some data and interpret that data and apply it back to the case study and how they might make management decisions. So you don't really need a whole lot for this lesson plan. You need the case study and the assignment, which come with the lesson plan, and then you'll need to download the data from the website, and you'll also need access to Microsoft Excel. So the first part of this activity is you will just introduce most of the terminology and the concepts from the teacher's notes to the students. And you'll really want to focus on the definition of wildlife management and the different types of management that can be used in managing wildlife. So after you've introduced all these introductory concepts, you want to move into the case study. So you can just give the students the case study, give them as much time as they need to read through it. It's not very long. And then once they're all finished, you can actually move into the assignment portion of the activity. And in this section, there are 4 questions, and they are primarily focused on, you get a set of data of survey data for Hellbenders from the last couple of decades from the IDNR and Purdue University, and then you'll have the students go through the 4 questions and analyze the data. The lesson plan will really kind of walk them through it, and you'll come up with about 3 different graphs, and these graphs will just be different depictions of things like the population decline over the last several decades and the comparison between the number of males and females, and other demographic data that we have for the population. And once you've finished analyzing all that data, you'll really just use the next section to have the students discuss the data and interpret that data. And you'll want to encourage them to really on their own kind of look at the trends in the graph and describe what they're seeing, and then how they can apply that to wildlife management. And that's really all there is for activity 1. We'll move on to activity 2. If you're interested in that, please see our next video. Thanks.
And now lesson 2.
Hi, I'm Nick Bergmeyer with Purdue University, and today we're going to cover activity 2 of the Nature of Teaching's The Scientific Process of Conservation Biology lesson plan. This is a pretty simple lesson plan. There aren't a lot of materials. All they really need are the case study, which comes with the lesson plan, something to write on, and the internet to download the scientific papers. So the first thing you'll want to do is reintroduce the concepts from the teacher's notes from activity 1. And if you've already done this recently, you don't really need to cover this too much, but you'll really want to focus on the different types of management and conservation plans. So after you've done that, you'll want to you'll pass out the case studies to each student, give them a little bit of time to read over them, they're not very long, and then move into section 3, where you separate the students into 4 groups. And these groups will be habitat destruction, disease, persecution, and just sort of general population decline. And what you'll do once you split these students into their groups is you'll tell them that they are graduate researchers, and you want them to do basically a literature search on these topics. So you'll have the students download each student will download a scientific peer-reviewed article, so not something from a newspaper or just a popular science magazine. And each student will summarize their own article. So it just needs to be 1 or 2 paragraphs what they learned from the article. And then within each group, you just give them a little bit of time for discussion and to compile the different ideas and facts that they've learned about their specific group topic. And then after that, you'll move into group presentations. So you'll have the groups present their findings to the whole class and what the sort of the main ideas and concepts for their topics are. And then after they finish that, you can kind of wrap everything up by teaching them a little bit about how the science of conservation planning works, and how conservation biologists, when they're making a conservation plan, they'll take these big ideas like habitat destruction or human persecution, and they'll really focus on those big topics. And while doing so, they might actually end up solving some of the smaller problems that they found throughout their literature searches. And it's also important to mention that in conservation planning that sometimes and usually it's not just one problem that's causing a species to decline. It's usually a few problems all working together. And after you finish that, you're done with the lesson and you're ready to move on to activity 3. So there will be a follow-up video for activity 3 if you're interested in that. And that's all we have for today. Thank you.
So now that we're done with lessons 1 and 2, we'll move on to lessons 3 and 4. And these 2 lessons focus heavily on actual management planning. So lesson 3, which is the big debates, and lesson 4, which is conservation and numbers game. They'll start out with lesson 3, where the students will take that information that they learned from lessons 1 and 2, and they'll develop their own management plan, and they will present these management plans to their peers, and then those peers will criticize or constructively criticize them. And then lesson 4 is focused really heavily on taking that information that they got from lesson 3 and revising their management plan. So we'll go ahead and move into the videos for lessons 3 and 4. And once that's finished, we'll turn it back over to Lauren and she'll wrap things up. So first, lesson 3.
Hi, I'm Nick Bergmeyer, Extension Wildlife Specialist with Purdue University. And today we're going to cover activity 3 from the Nature of Teaching's The Scientific Process of Conservation Biology lesson plan. In this lesson, we really want to give students the opportunity to use supporting evidence and debate to support the conservation management plans they've been working on. Now, there aren't a lot of materials that you need. They're all included in the provided lesson plan. They include the case study, a worksheet, a debate score sheet, and also just the fact sheets for the different issues facing Hellbenders. So the first thing you'll want to do is go back over a little bit of the teacher notes. If you've already done this in activities 1 and 2, you don't need to cover this too much. It'll just be a short review. Then you'll move on to handing out the case studies, and you'll just give your students, these are pretty short, you'll give them an opportunity to read through those, and then you'll move into the main activity where you split your students into 4 groups. And if you've already done this in activity 2, you can use the same groups, and these groups each represent a different graduate student focused on a different project. And so these groups include disease, habitat destruction, human persecution, and also just general population decline. So all 4 big issues facing Hellbenders. And after you split them into their groups, you'll give them the fact sheet for their specific group. Give them time to read through that, learn a little bit more about their problem, and then you'll give them the management plan development worksheet. And with this, you'll give them a fairly significant amount of time, probably at least 30 minutes, to go through their problem and develop a roughly 4 to 6 minute debate in support of their management plan. So these want to be sort of fact-based debates that they can use to support their how they plan to tackle their problem. So once they've had enough time to develop their argument, you'll have each group present, they'll get 4 to 6 minutes to present their plan, and these plans will be scored by all of the other students. And the scoring will be based on things like if it's fact-based, or if it was clear and concise, if it stayed within the allotted time. And then, after you add up everybody's score, the top 2 scoring groups will have the opportunity for a 2-minute rebuttal. And during these rebuttals, they can address some of the issues that they might have seen that came up in scoring, and really focus to try to fine-tune that argument for their conservation plan. And in the end, the highest score wins. So after the debates, You'll want to sort of wrap up with two things. The first, you want to discuss the debates with the students, talk about similarities and difference between the debates and the issues that came up, and ways that they might improve their management plans. And then you'll want to sort of expand and focus on the bigger picture, where you talk about, in conservation, oftentimes we're not really using debate to get funding, but we are frequently competing against our peers when we're looking for funding, and how this is forming a cogent argument for your plan or your research project is important in conservation biology careers. And with that, we really finish up activity 3. If you're interested in activity 4, we'll have a video for that too. Thank you.
And finally, lesson 4.
Hi, I'm Nick Bergmeyer, Extension Wildlife Specialist with Purdue University. And today we're going to cover activity 4 from the Nature of Teaching's The Scientific Process of Conservation Biology lesson plan. Now, in this activity, we're really giving students the opportunity to use problem solving in a research setting to solve a specific issue. And similar to previous lessons, there aren't a lot of required materials. You'll need the case study for each student, a score sheet for each student, a marker for each group, a die for each group, and a poster board for each group. So you'll start by reviewing the teacher notes. If you've already done this in activities 1, 2, and 3, you don't need to spend too much time on this. And then you'll hand out the case study, and you give each student enough time to read through that. Now, there is a specific point in the case study where you want the students to stop, and that's when they find out that all of the Hellbenders that were previously released disappeared. At that point, you'll split the students into 6 equal groups, roughly equal groups, and you'll have each group roll a die. And that die, of course, whatever score they get, corresponds to one of 6 potential scenarios that cause the Hellbenders to disappear. And so each of these groups actually represents a graduate researcher that is sort of trying to formulate a plan to prevent this from ever happening again. So at that point, you'll give them their poster board and their marker, and you'll give them enough time to formulate a new plan to prevent any of these scenarios from happening again. And these could be things like, these scenarios include a 100-year flood that washed all the Hellbenders away, or possibly all the Hellbenders got a disease. So these are the issues that they're trying to solve. And once they have enough time to formulate a plan and hopefully illustrate the plan on their poster board, each group will have to present that plan to the classroom. And you'll give them 6 minutes, or up to 6 minutes to present their plan. And all of the students that are not presenting will actually score the other group's plans. And they're scored on, similar to activity 3, they'll be scored on things like clear and concise, and an actual feasible plan, something that wouldn't cost millions and millions of dollars to implement. And then at the end, all plans that score at least 16 out of 20 will be chosen for additional funding, so their plan would be considered successful. Now, to wrap up this activity, it's really important to discuss with students that this is the kind of thing that happens in real life. So oftentimes your first plan, it fails, and you have to come up with a follow-up plan and solve these issues as they present themselves. And so this is a sort of a key aspect of conservation biology that all of us have to face. All of us have to face at some point. And with that, activity 4 is finished, and we are finished with this lesson plan. So if you haven't seen the videos for activities 1, 2, and 3, please view those if you're interested, and thank you.
All right, thank you, Nick, and thank you for all of you who joined us today. With that, I again thank you for participating in this webinar titled The Scientific Process of Conservation Biology, Analyze, Design, and Debate. I hope you consider participating in our many other webinars through the Nature of Teaching as well. If you enjoyed this one, I encourage you to click on the card in the top right corner of your screen to visit our Nature of Teaching YouTube channel. Here you can view sneak peeks of lesson plans that are directly related to the webinar you just completed. To obtain your certificate of completion for this 30-minute webinar, please click on the second card in the top right of your screen. Here you'll be directed to a short Qualtrics survey to provide us some feedback on the program. Once that is completed, you'll be automatically emailed your certificate of completion. We hope you enjoyed learning with us and consider participating in additional professional development webinars offered by the Nature of Teaching team. Until then, thank you for engaging with youth and nature.